expressed are those of the sponsor and do not necessarily reflect the views of Radio 1, WTLC AM 1310, 92.7 FM, 95.1 FM, The Light, and its management. And now, to address the legal concerns of our community, AM 1310 The Light presents Legally Speaking. Here is today's host.
Good morning, everyone, from all our various media outlets. Thank again for joining us. We are on 10 different media now. So here's our call-in numbers, everyone. It's 403-204-0419. Our call-in number is 403-204-0419. And I'll announce that about 5 times a day because that will be our call-in numbers from now on. Today, we have some bombshell court decision, but we're going to start off with a law that take effect in Indiana that we think could result in increase in violence. But we're going to have our usual superstar panel with Attorney Milton from LA and Attorney Vanita from Chicago, formerly Indianapolis. And then we also have a certified police legal advisor today, Attorney Robert Turner, who Attorney Turner serves as the public safety director for the city of Indianapolis. He also was on the police department for many years. But more importantly, he headed up the police training academy. He trained police officers how to behave and how to properly follow the law. And most importantly, he also wrote the police general orders that deal with excessive force in our city. And because we're going to start off because effective July 1st, Indiana become an open carry law with very limited amount of restrictions. And I just thought that this law was bad for law enforcement. And so we're going to try to analyze the various aspects of open carry and how it affects you in the community. We think that this show is important because there are so many folks that I talk to that get pulled over by police officers and it end up being acrimonious type relationship that established between them and the cop. And we're going to talk about ways in which we can de-escalate this process so the life you save may be your own. Okay, we'll start with Attorney Turner. Attorney Turner, how are you doing today, sir?
Mr. Lee, how are you?
I'm doing great. First of all, I saw that law enforcement, this law, open carry, Indiana joined a list of states that now allow people to carry guns. And my first introduction was last Friday when I went to the gas station to fill up with gas while taking out my credit card and getting gas. I looked to my left, I looked to my right. Every person at the gas station around me had a gun. It was shown. And I'm thinking now that when I go to the gas station, in addition to my credit card, now I have to take a loaded weapon. But first of all, this new law, will that help police officer? Would that be an additional problem for law enforcement?
I don't believe there's any police officer that I've talked to that thought this would help law enforcement. I think that it'll do just the opposite. But there's a bigger concern for me. And when you think about all of the terrorist attacks in America, people going into movies, grocery stores, churches, and schools. So when you're in a grocery store and you see someone coming in with a weapon, what should you do? Should you assume that that's an open carry, legal person operating just as a private citizen, or is this person coming in to kill people? And a lot of people will just react to the weapon, not wanting to take the chance that this person is going to start slaughtering people. So I anticipate that a lot of people will confront other people with weapons, and there'll be a lot more fatal shootings as a result of the open carry law. I also believe that they've also supplied police officers with justification to shoot people in certain situations. So there's a lot of shootings in America where police claim they saw a gun, and the shooting is sometimes ruled justified as reasonable use of deadly force. However, if everybody can carry a gun, and guns are going to be in most cars, police officers who are often killed, most often in traffic stops, are going to be overly apprehensive and are going to react when they see a weapon, not knowing if they're going to be shot or not. And if they do shoot and kill someone and the person has a gun, it kind of gives them justification, even though the gun might be legal. So it's a real narrow line there that's going to cause a lot of confrontations and problems. In Indianapolis, we have excessive number of homicides. You know, when I left the police department, we had 65 homicides annually with 90+% solved. Now we have 300 with 90% unsolved. And a lot of those are young Black men. So when young Black men now confront each other knowing they can carry guns, what are they going to think? They're going to think the person that they're dealing with, like you say, at a filling station. We've had incidents where Black men shot each other at filling station because they said he had an aggressive look. They looked at each other aggressively and started shooting. Didn't know each other. So I see a problem with it. I also see a problem with the police trying to regulate weapons now, because they're not going to know when they can actually make an arrest. And there is an offense still in the books while unlawfully carrying a weapon, because everybody's not authorized to carry a weapon under this new law. You have to have certain, I guess, what they call reasonable person specifications, meaning you can't be a convicted felon. You can't be a person convicted of domestic violence. You can't have a history of mental abuse, that kind of thing. So everybody's not going to be qualified.
We have a caller.
I lost Mr. Lee. Are you there, Mr. Lee?
We have a caller. Yeah, he's coming back on.
Okay.
Caller, you're on the line. Do you have a question for our panel? Caller?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead. You have a question for our panel.
Good morning. Good morning. This is past President Alfreda Robinson. Good morning to everyone. I was just listening in, and I will continue to listen. I don't have a question right now.
Okay. So based on the current law in the state of Indiana, I think the law is effective July the 1st. Before anyone goes to, I guess, the effort to buy a gun, I think you might want to talk to an attorney, because there are qualifying languages in the new law. As I said, if you've been convicted in the last 5 years of resisting arrest, you're not going to be qualified. If you have a felony conviction, if you have a conviction for domestic violence, unless you've been otherwise qualified, meaning the courts have given you that authority again. If you've been convicted for the past use of a weapon in a careless manner, reckless use of a weapon, if you've been determined to be emotionally unstable at any given time, that certainly would have helped with some of the people that have committed the terrorist attacks with assault weapons, like the one in Texas. If you've got a previous handgun violation, even if you've got certain juvenile violations, you might not be qualified under the new law. So before you go out and buy a weapon, assuming that you can carry it openly, you should take the time to talk to an attorney and talk about your specific history. What is your criminal history, if you have one?
Is there any requirement for training or practice or experience with that gun after you buy it or before you buy it?
When I first joined the police department in '73, one of the first things I proposed was some type of requirements for training when anybody buys a gun. And the reason I did that was because one of the first runs I got was a child that was killed with a firearm. And it was because the mother, who bought a firearm, and she did so legally, unfortunately left the firearm out, not believing the child would go and get the gun, not believing the child had the ability to operate the gun. So it was very important, I think, to give people training so they would know how to store them, how to lock them, how they actually operate. A lot of people buy guns that don't understand. For example, with certain weapons, you got the cylinder firearm, the wheel gun, and you got other semi-automatics. And a lot of people think that when you take the slide out of a semi, that it doesn't have any bullets in it when there's one in the barrel. And then they start playing with the gun once you get the slide out, not realizing there's one in the barrel. And I've seen several people kill that way. So they ought to not just get weapon training, but they ought to have specific training with the weapon that they buy.
In this law that you're saying exists in Mr. Lee's neighborhood now, is there a requirement for training before you buy the gun?
No,
or at all?
no, there is not now, nor has there been, but there should be.
I got
I
you.
absolutely agree.
I got you on the shoe.
Now, one of the things that I'm having some computer issues. One of the things that I want to figure out is that there's a lot of stops. Officers are going to be more apprehensive. Walk us through what a citizen should do when they're stopped by a police officer, first in an open area, out on the interstate, or in areas that's not well lit.
Well, what I always tell people, first of all, is don't wait till you're stopped. I did from the very beginning what I've always told people, and I particularly did this for my own son. First thing you want to do is search your own car. Now, I know that sounds stupid, but no, search your own car, because other people get in your car. Especially if you're a young kid, you have some of your teenage friends get in. Many times people find that there are things in the car that are not theirs. Sometimes police stop you and find one of your friends has left a marijuana cigarette, the roach in the ashtray. There have been weapons found in there, and I even have a client now who just got arrested because the police found an old prescription in the trunk of his car that belonged to a friend of his that stayed with him for a while. And they locked him under the legend drug law. This prescription was 10 years old. So search your own car. Make sure there's nothing in there that shouldn't be in there, first of all. Make sure you do have your registration, your insurance papers, your driver's license, anything that you need. So that's the beginning. Also, of course, make sure your equipment's working. Your lights, etc., your tail lights, your turn signals, that helps you, sometimes prevents a stop. But if you are stopped by the police, and I think it's terrible if you're stopped by the police and the police immediately seize a weapon, because even though with this new law, they're going to react. They're going to jump back. They'll probably draw their gun. And weapons are sometimes, as we've seen in some of the incidents where people were killed, weapons are not always controllable once they're drawn. There's accidental discharges. There's some people that actually draw their weapon believing they drew a taser and end up killing people with their weapon, believing they're trying to stun them with a taser, because that reaction is so automatic. You have a question?
Yes, I do. Coincidentally, this week I had 2 gun possession cases come into my office, and one that strikes me really scary after the law has just passed is a young man that just graduated from Southern University, and he's out here, and his mother-in-law loves him to death, help pay for his education, and he drives her 2019 Mercedes around, and he's leaving the gas station not far from me on Slauson and Crenshaw, and his cousins are in the car with him. They're black, and they're large young men. He's 6'4", his cousin is 6'3", 280, but they're not doing anything but getting gas. And the car has a new license plate on it that's only 2 years old in California. So it drew the attention of the officer, because it's not the typical white license, but it's a black digital license that's framed in the license plate. And they pull him over because of the license plate. And as soon as they pull him over, the young man says, "I have a gun in my glove compartment," because they asked for registration and insurance. And immediately the officer tells him to freeze, back. Before he knew it, he said there are about 10 or 12 police cars on them, shotguns pointed by at least 10 officers. There's a helicopter overhead. He hasn't gotten the gun out of the glove compartment yet. There's a helicopter overhead. They asked him to back out, take the position, lie prone. Ends up, he has a permit. He's from Louisiana. He said, "We carry our guns inside the car as long as it's not loaded." And it wasn't loaded, but the magazine was in the glove compartment. He's now charged with the felony possession. I don't know if that charge will change now, but I'm just thinking, if you're carrying it and it's in your glove compartment where you think it's cool at, I'm just concerned about how cops approach that situation when they know a black man has a gun in the car? Because I've heard too many stories about how they react to that.
Well, unfortunately, that is the history of law enforcement, particularly with black men in America. That has happened time and time again. And another consideration that I have, not only with a man having a gun in the car, but in the situation where you have a black man in a car with a gun, legal, and he's stopped by a police officer, and the police officer sees the gun, the police officer reacts and shoots the black man. Normally, the police officer say, well, he had a gun. Well, now the gun's legal, so he has a gun.
He has a gun.
The black man is dead. The gun's there. The police said he pulled the gun. There's no witnesses. One person's word against the other. The black man is dead. That's it. Now, what if the opposite happens? Black man has a gun. The police jump back, pull his gun. The black man pulls a gun. He shoots the police officer because he thought the police officer was going to shoot him. Then the black man is under arrest for murdering a police officer.
So they already believe all these young black men in LA, especially, have a gun. They just believe that, Nate, unequivocally, at least 50%. So they know anytime they stop a car with a black man in it, 5 out of 10 times they're going to get a gun.
Right.
So now what's going to happen with their belief? They all got guns. They already believe that anyway. I can't imagine anything more happening, but I just don't know what the situation is going to look like.
Well, it's going to, the reality will be that they will still stop the car. They will stop the car with more backup.
Right.
They will stop the car with more so assault weapons at the ready, and will then, rather than approaching the car, get on the PA and demand that everybody come out with their hands up and do that whole routine. So they're going to go through a different procedure that'll be more cautious, but it'll also be more dangerous because, again, anytime you pull out that kind of weapon, anything can happen.
But God dang it, they got no business pointing a gun at you just because you're black. This young man said, Mr. Grimes, I started praying, Lord, please let me die slowly, because one of the officers who had a shotgun pointed at him was shaking a lot. Right. And he said, I just knew that trigger was going to go at any minute.
Well, but you know that the reality is this. There are a lot of policemen, not all, but a lot of police are simply afraid. They're just afraid, and particularly afraid of black men because they think black men are violent. And that mentality, I guess, comes from them. It doesn't come necessarily from us. So they're afraid, and there have been a number of situations. That young man that was shot by the female cop who believed she was pulling her taser, but she pulled her handgun.
All right.
What the man did not have a weapon.
Right.
There were several police officers there. Why did you even have to tase him? It wasn't that big of it wasn't that serious of a situation. The one thing about force is not always necessary. It's just not. Just because you don't obey the command of a police officer doesn't mean you should be beat down or shot. I mean, that's unrealistic. But police officers don't seem to have another option, or they're afraid to simply tell the person step out of the car. And they start pulling the person out when in fact the person might be illegally parked and not have a driver's license. And you can deal with that without a struggle. You can deal with that. You can run the registration on the license. You can still summon the person in. So there's a number of other options that might be available to you. I think the reason they grab the person is they assume something else is wrong. There's a dead body in the car. There's drugs in the car. So he must be resisting for a reason. So that's why they try to get the person out and the struggle starts.
So what do you suggest young black men do when they're stopped by a police officer?
Well, that's what we're talking about. Number one, make sure your car is clean. I do not recommend the young black men, everybody carry a gun. Just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. I don't recommend that at all. But if you're going to carry a gun, you know, and you believe that you might be stopped, you can always carry the gun in the trunk of the car. The worst thing in the world you want to do is carry it exposed. But like you said, if you are stopped, you do have a gun. I do agree that the thing you should do is tell the policeman, there's a gun in the car, officer. What do you want me to do? You have your hands on the wheel. There's a gun in the car. What do you want me to do? You want me to step out? You want me to do? Ask the police officer what he wants him to do.
That's what this kid did. He stopped and he obeyed, and the man told him there's a gun in the truck compartment, and they went ballistics.
Well, there's no absolute answer because every policeman's going to react differently. The way I would handle that would be totally different than the way another police officer would do that.
Gotcha.
Attorney Banks, I was in Chicago yesterday, and I noticed every police officer in Chicago I ran across had a bulletproof vest on.
Yeah. And that's pretty much standard equipment now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it makes sense, but you'd also think it would give them a certain degree of security and comfort that when they do approach a car, they've got some protection. So that's something I think should, but again, we have too many people shot in traffic situations, particularly for things that are not violent incidents. Yeah, I do think
that bulletproof vest may protect them from a body shot, but it doesn't change their mentality in approaching people, I don't think.
No, it doesn't. But, you know, I think it was, you know, when we first joined the policemen back in the 70s, we didn't have bulletproof vests. We didn't have mace. We didn't have tasers. We didn't have assault rifles. Mm-hmm. And we didn't shoot people like they do now. So again, it has a lot to do with where you are and what happens. I do think the bulletproof vest is rational equipment. But again, I don't necessarily believe it gives absolute comfort to police. Right. But I don't believe that their fear, if you have fear of making a traffic stop, then again, you probably shouldn't be out there. You shouldn't be patrolling.
That's right. Absolutely. And Attorney Turner, do bulletproof vests protect police against AR-15 rifles, for example?
There are some bulletproof vests that do. Most of the bulletproof vests that we've seen, they also have an insert. So you have a bulletproof vest that'll protect you against most weapons, most handguns, but there's also an insert, a metal plate you can slide in it that would protect you from an assault rifle. But again, it depends on where you hit the vest, because there are a lot of police officers been killed wearing bulletproof vests. You can get around a bulletproof vest if you hit it on the side or if there's some kind of deflection of the bullet. So bulletproof vests aren't absolute. It still sometimes misses and policeman gets killed.
So speaking of that, Ms. Banks brought something to my mind. Is your law there that you started talking about, does that open the door for all guns, including the assault weapons and these high-powered rifles? They can have those now too?
Assault rifles, you can buy those here now.
Right. And
you can. And you can carry them.
Right, in public, as long as they're out in the open.
And I think that the problem with the assault rifles, or one like, for example, in Uvalde, Texas, this kid's 18, he walks in and buys two, right, you know, without any kind of screening. Now, if I went to the drugstore and tried to buy Tylenol with codeine, they call the FBI on me. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that they put more restrictions on something like arthritis medicine than they do assault weapons. It's almost like they're trying to provoke confrontation with some of these gun laws. It just doesn't make sense. Why would any 18-year-old need two assault rifles? Why would that not trigger some kind of concern?
I saw the tape of the shooting in Buffalo, and for the first time, I was impressed with how lethal that weapon is. It went pop, 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 and there were 3 people dead in less than 5 seconds. I've never seen that in my life. Man does not need that gun on the street or hunting or anywhere else, and not maybe warfare, but that's a different thing.
what is a war weapon. That's the problem. Yeah. And that's what was being purchased by the Proud Boys, you know, the Oath Keepers, and all these groups are purchasing these weapons for what they consider to be the final confrontation in America.
That's a deadly weapon, brothers.
Yeah, it is.
And certainly not contemplated by our constitutional, our founding fathers.
No, well, that is not what the Second Amendment means. So you know, I see the people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's the absolute most repulsive human I've ever seen in my life in politics. But you just wonder what people like that are actually thinking. Why would anybody elect somebody like that and send them to Congress to affect the laws? That's what's happened to this country. This country is sending people that are rationally insane. You know, they're on the board of insanity. They still have some reason, but they're sending these people to Congress, and these people are talking all these conspiracy theories and exciting America that there's some type of rebellion and et cetera is necessary to stabilize America, to keep others from taking it over. I mean, this is real dangerous talk.
Oh, one critical point here. The second equation in terms of police stop. Let's talk about the situations in which you are in a darkened area. Would you advise a person to drive slowly, keep their lights on until they get to a lit area so that the encounter can be recorded? And would that be a situation in which a person will cause more consternation or adverse action to the officer, or is that something you recommend that citizens do to protect themselves?
Let me answer that question. Rodney King drove 30, 25, 35 miles an hour once he saw the police behind him after he got off the freeway. He stopped at stoplights and went through the red, but he stopped. He stopped at a stop sign, then looked both ways, and they were talking about it. They were laughing about it. And when he pulled over, he got the poo-poo beat out of him because he didn't stop when he was told to stop. So Nate, that may be a smart thing to do, and we think it might be, but they punish you when you don't obey them.
Well, there are two cases that I had that address that. And the reason I highlight these two cases is both people in these cases were women. One of them was actually a media person, very popular. The other one was a nurse. And both of them were stopped by the police. They were in areas that they felt were kind of isolated. And both of them proceeded slowly to what they felt was more populated, lighted area. Both of them were arrested for resisting fleeing, and both of them were injured, thrown to the ground, both scarred knees. So that's happened. And again, that has got to do with the police officer, the training and the supervision of police departments. You see so many times, and this is so very important. You see so many times that they're targeting police officers and saying they did this, they did that, and firing them and arresting them. They should arrest the chiefs who failed to train these guys. They let these guys do that. Right. In the George Floyd situation, there's no way in the world that a police department that was properly trained would have an officer standing there while another officer is choking somebody to death. Right. They would snatch that officer off that man so quickly. They should arrest these semi-qualified chiefs like that idiot in Uvalde, Texas, who ran to the school, leaving his political meeting, and stood outside while he was safe while the children were being killed for an hour. That man wasn't a police chief, he was a politician. The mayors pick police chiefs because they're weak, not police chiefs that know what they're doing, that are strong, that'll stand up and train the policemen right and equip them right. Just like Trump picked Supreme Court justices who were weak, who he could control. That's what's happening in America. Politicians pick weak, controllable people for critical positions, and things fall apart. There should be a standard in America for police chiefs to be qualified to run departments, and it's not.
Man, that's a sobering comment. What about the situation in which a person is stopped in the broad daytime, and walk through real quickly how the citizens should react to being stopped by the officer. What does citizens do step by step?
Well, he just simply cooperate with the officer. You don't know why you're being stopped. A lot of people believe that because the police officer stops them, the police officer is harassing them, etc., because they haven't done anything. And that's not necessarily the case. There's many cases where the police officer might be involved in another investigation, and people say this car left this scene. They might say it's a 97 Ford, and it's purple, and it's got a convertible top, and so the police are looking for that car. And if they find something close in that vicinity, and you look for certain suspects, and that person fits the suspect description, they're going to make an investigatory stop. That's a Terry stop. It doesn't mean you did anything. He's just trying to determine if you're the person. So if your response is immediately get upset, I didn't do anything. You stopped because I'm black, and the policeman doesn't know what to think. I wonder if this is the guy, the way he's acting. Next thing you know, you have a confrontation. So first of all, don't panic just because the police turn on his lights, but stop and say, officer, can I help you? Did I do something wrong? And just ask first and then cooperate. But the most important thing is, no matter what happens, don't fight the police out there. That's not a court. You're not going to win. He's going to call other police. You're going to be beat down or shot. Your fight is in court with your attorney. Throw your hands up. I don't care if you did absolutely nothing. Throw your hands up, cooperate, let him handcuff you, and call your attorney. We will fight in court. Don't fight on the street.
And I always advise young people that your goal is in those encounters is to get home safely, alive.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key.
Well, the final question that we're getting on our chat has to do with the use of deadly force. All week long, for the last month, we've been treated by the congressional hearing about what happened on January 6th of last year, and when the insurrectionists attacked the nation capital and took over the government, apparently. The question by our caller is, why didn't the Capitol Police or the police officer open fire on the insurrectionists when they were attacked on January 6th last year?
Let me answer that question, Dave, because I wasn't there. That's why. Well, I assume they did not believe that these guys were going to do what they did. They were not prepared. And they were not prepared because somebody didn't give them the right information. But again, I genuinely believe that part of the problem with law enforcement, even at the Capitol, is having the right people in charge. I think the Capitol Police should have had National Guard on notice. Once that rally was announced by Trump, you should have known there was going to be a problem. National Guard should have been there. Now, personally, I would have mounted 50 caliber machine guns, but again, I wasn't there. So I understand. I don't blame the Capitol Police. I think they were trying to be gentle people and handle it the right way, but they were up against terrorists. They were not up against protesting citizens. It's a shame. I hope that it never happens again. And it's really kind of embarrassment that a nation that has fought so many battles, that was able to defeat Hitler, World War II, allows an angry ex-president to almost overthrow the government. So I don't think that's going to happen again.
Mr. Turner, I've gone along with everything you've said this morning, but when you said you would have mounted a 50 caliber machine gun against citizens, then I have to question that. What was it about that you think required that much power?
Because the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were armed. They had bombs, they had weapons. They were there to, in fact, initiate a military attack. Did you see them? I mean, that's what they were doing. I'm not talking about shooting down innocent people, but that group that was there to actually do that, that in fact walked in a parallel line up that wasn't a coincidence. That was an organized insurrection. And with the intention of killing members of Congress and the House. So in light of the force, and if you recall, I don't know how many Capitol Police were killed, but brutally killed, brutally beaten, I would have used deadly force.
Yeah,
I think
go with deadly force. I just kind of reserve that caliber of weapon for the battlefield, a legitimate quote battlefield, I guess. I'm a little conservative.
Well, and I agree there, but like when you had assault, again, most of the weapons, and there were also pipe bombs.
Mhm.
I mean, and a lot of these things have not necessarily been spoken of, but given the, I guess, tone of that assault, given the absolute disrespect for law and order, and given we're talking about the preservation of the country, I would have used as much force as necessary to make sure they were not successful. Now, 50 caliber machine guns might have been an exaggeration.
Heavy. Okay, I just wanted to check.
I probably would have had a couple of M1 tanks there too, that I mentioned.
Okay. Well, thank you, Attorney Turner. It's been very informative, and we got to revisit this subject again because of the mass shooting in America, and maybe we're going to talk about this in about 3 weeks because we need to deal with this mass shooting issues in America. And so stay tuned, audience, because we're going to come back in about 3 weeks. Our next subject that we're going to transition to today is Roe versus Wade decision, the draconian decision that outlawed abortion basically in the state of Mississippi. And as a result, there was a number of states that had trigger legislation that said abortion is illegal. But the most disturbing thing about the decision was the concurrent opinion by Justice Thomas, who also said that he invited people to revisit the idea of same-sex marriages, contraception, and it's just a wide range of activity. The one thing he didn't say was interracial marriage, because that would, of course, make his marriage illegal. But that was the only thing he didn't say he might make illegal. So, Attorney Banks, I know you've been all over this subject matter. Where do we go from here?
Well, Attorney Lee, let me just first state that this was a disastrous decision. The 6-3 decision by the ultra-conservative judges on the Supreme Court, which upheld the Mississippi law, which bans abortion after 15 weeks, and goes further to, in a 5-4 decision joined by Justice Roberts, overturning Roe versus Wade, the landmark 7-2 opinion in 1973, as well as the Casey opinion, most recent Supreme Court opinion relative to abortion that was decided in 1992. And as you stated, there are at least 13 states that have trigger laws that will end abortion and reproductive health in those states. And some of those trigger laws were designed to go into effect immediately. I believe at least 6 of those states, and Arkansas outlawed abortion yesterday on the heels of the announcement of the decision. And to your point regarding Justice Thomas's concurring opinion, as you know, many commentators had predicted that other rights would be threatened as a result of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Thomas argued that in his concurring opinion that the Constitution's due process clause does not provide a right to abortion or any other substantive rights. And that, and the majority opinion rationale is so flimsy in that a right, in a statement that a right to abortion is not, quote, deeply rooted in history, and overturning nearly 50 years of precedence and reliance on Roe versus Wade. And so what we're seeing in this opinion is women losing a right, a fundamental right to make decisions regarding their reproductive health. And in fact, that right should not be, but will be, unfortunately, based on one's zip code. There are approximately 25 states that would ban abortion in some form, many without regard, with no exceptions, including the health of the woman, or for incest or rape. This decision will, as you see from the protest around the country, even further divide our nation. And what we can do at this point is a number of things. One, continue those protests. Let your congressman know where you stand on a woman's right to choose and make decisions regarding her reproductive health care. This decision just shows why voting matters, why judges matter, why it's important for us to vote in every single election. And let me just stop there.
Well, Attorney Banks, I think that our audience should also know that women were granted the right to vote a little bit more than a century ago. It's passed, the 19th Amendment passed Congress on June the 4th, 1919, but it was ratified on August 18th, 1920. So the 19th Amendment was granted women the right to vote, even though we had the 14th Amendment that gave all citizens equal protection. So I think that this new ruling is a radical departure, that is an erosion of the 14th Amendment and 19th Amendment, because now women don't get to make a choice with their own body. It's just idiotic. Now, but here's another issue that I called want to know about. The Supreme Court justices who recently appointed, they all said one thing: Roe is well-respected law, and they vowed in person with those sentences they would not overturn them. So what should happen to the judges now that we know that openly lied to the Senate during their confirmation process? They were under oath at the time. What should happen, if anything?
They said they were respected laws. They didn't say they were going to follow them, Nate, but go ahead.
Well, it was the interpretation that I received on that and members of Congress is that they would follow stare decisis, that this is established law. It's been around for half a century, and there was no reason to revisit that established law. Mm-hmm. You know, to me, it was a no-brainer, because the way I saw that, although the President Trump 45th said that he would only appoint judges that would overturn Roe. So he had said that.
He did what he said, like he has done.
Attorney Banks?
They lied straight out, full stop. And
but he said, what should be done with them? What can you do with them? I don't think you can do anything with them.
They're lifetime appointments. There's nothing, they're lifetime appointments. And one thing about the Constitution, when people talk about the Constitution, most of the laws we have were not specifically provided within the Constitution. They were provided as a result of the court's interpretation of the Constitution. And in Roe particularly, I think when you talk about the rights of women as individuals to make decisions about their body, that certainly is much more critical than the rights afforded by the same courts with respect to people buying weapons, which they believe is deeply rooted in the Constitution, but they believe a woman's right to just choose what happens to her body is not deeply rooted in the Constitution. Doesn't make any sense.
Okay, for our listening audience, our call-in number, write this down, is 403-204-0419, 403-204-0419. And the reason we do that is that it gives us a better ability to hear what you're saying than the regular radio station call-in number. So 403-204-0419. Well, here's the problem.
Lee,
Yes.
back to Justice Thomas, he specifically called out in his concurring opinion, and I quote, "In future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, which provides a right for a constitutional right to contraceptives, to that Supreme Court decision based in a right of privacy should be revisited. The Lawrence case he calls out, which stands for the proposition that states cannot outlaw consensual gay sex. And then, of course, hopefully I'm not butchering too bad the name of this opinion, Obergefell versus Hodges, which provides for a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. As you stated, Attorney Lee, he conveniently failed to call out the Loving case, which provides a constitutional right to
You are in the meeting now. There
interracial
are 6
marriage.
participants in the meeting.
All of these rights based on a right to privacy are under threat.
Okay, for our callers, I apologize. Our 403 number is not working today. The other call-in number is 463-204-0419. That's 463-204-0419. That call you should be able to get through on. The other call for a reason is not operating correctly. 463-204-0419. So
But you don't want to?
I know everybody has at least one book in them.
They do. I agree.
a producer, okay. Now let's take one quick caller. Caller, you have a question for us today. Mr. Metcalf?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. How you doing? Good brother Nate, and
Great.
to all the attorneys on the panel here. Quick question. I know it was lost in the discussion with all the other things happening this week, but I thought the Miranda decision, my mother was really lamenting the Miranda decision and what happened in California. I don't know if Attorney Grimes knows about that case. He probably does. But she thought that the Miranda, pardon me?
No, I'm just.
Yeah, she thought that decision that they gave down was even worse. And I think, and the only thing that they did right the last couple of weeks was the Monsanto decision, the Roundup decision, which they kicked that and told them no, they wouldn't stop the class action lawsuits, which was good because that was brought on first by a brother out there in California again. But what your opinion of that Miranda decision, Attorney Turner? That is the one that I'm thinking. She told me, my mother's attorney too, that you said something about cooperating with the police. After that Miranda decision, she said, don't say a word. Don't say one word. You don't know if you're a witness of a crime, if you've been suspected of a crime. It doesn't matter. Don't talk unless you have an attorney. Don't say one word, period, unless you have an attorney. I'd like you guys' opinions on that. Thank you.
Well, when you talk about Miranda and what we were talking about, if you're stopped by the police, obviously if police stop you and they make an inquiry, you don't have to make a statement. But if the police officer can certainly ask you who you are, ask you for your driver's license, etc. That's not saying that you make a statement. Obviously, if a police officer wants to question you, you have a right to use Miranda. And Miranda applies in most cases, but Miranda is not always applicable based on, your, I guess, custody or environment. If you're not in custody, and if you don't have a interrogation, then Miranda really doesn't apply. You still don't have to make a statement. But I think for a simple traffic stop, particularly under Terry, I think a police officer would have a right to ask you a certain question as to who you are, identify yourself, things like that.
Yes, I'm 30 on 8.
I noted
Plus-
the.
Okay, Pierre, you have a
Well,
question
well.
coming for us today.
Oh, good afternoon, Nate. I just wanted to ask the attorney from Chicago, that's it, the attorney from Chicago, how are gun laws going to affect, how's that Supreme Court ruling going to affect Chicago? And the other thing is, these are three, I know you're a big timer in the Democratic Party, Nate. These are three excellent campaign issues that we can take to the midterms. Not raising the gun age, the January 6th hearing, and Roe v. Wade. And I'll get off the phone. Thank you for taking my call.
I agree with you, caller, that abortion rights and gun rights and voting rights and fundamental constitutional rights are on the ballot for the midterms in November. And with respect to your question relative to the Supreme Court ruling in this week with respect to overturning and there have been so many cases this week decided by the Supreme Court and so many inconsistencies as we begin to analyze these cases. And I'm still in the process of analyzing this precedent as well as the bipartisan federal law that is on its way to President Biden's desk. But the Supreme Court case that you're referencing overturned a 100-year New York law regulating concealed carry. And so we're analyzing what the impact of that decision will be in cities like Chicago and Indianapolis relative to the discussion that we've been having this morning. And then also the caller referenced the Miranda decision, Supreme Court decision that did not escape us either, which stands for the proposition that a suspect or an individual that has not been provided their Miranda warning of their right to remain silent, that they cannot then bring a civil suit against the police officer for damages under federal civil rights law, even if the evidence was ultimately used against them in their criminal trial. And so that's a curtailment of the law, in my view. Again, still analyzing this opinion in juxtaposition to the Supreme Court gun opinion, as well as the bipartisan federal gun legislation as well. I'm interested in Attorney Turner's perspective with respect to that new ruling by the Supreme Court with respect to the court holding that the failure to provide Miranda rights does not confer a right to a civil action against the police officer.
Well, most civil actions against law enforcement actually are more so directed to the more administrative people, either the mayor, the police chiefs, et cetera, directors, as opposed to the individual police officer, as long as the police officer is acting in his capacity as a police officer in the line of duty. So they simply bump it up. So I assume you could still file the lawsuit against the city, but you couldn't name the individual officer civilly. And that's usually the way it happens here in Indianapolis, although in the few times I've done it, I've always named the officer anyway. Usually the city files to dismiss as to the officer based on the fact that he is an agent of the city. So I don't find that to be too inconsistent with what we already do. The only time I think it would be inconsistent would be if the police officer deviated from his training and the actual official policies and practices of the police department and did something completely different that was clearly based on race or some other hostility that the officer has against the individual, that should be individually based and it should be allowed in terms of a lawsuit against the individual person, the officer.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for calling in today. We run out of time. And next weekend is 4th of July, so we're off. So we'll be back on July 9th weekend to cover these important subjects. I'd like to thank everybody for listening today, and may God bless and keep you to July 9th. Please join us then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nate.
Thank you.